Good morning. I'm Russell Raphael from North London, Ulysses. Welcome to another video. This is a video in the extra video series. Those that don't know, my videos are all about James Joyce's Ulysses. They're either reading videos where I simply read the book, or they are analysis videos where I go through it page by page and analyze, or they fall into what I call the extra video series, where I just take a theme that seems to me quite interesting that arose out of the particular chapter that we read. Because we are the heart of this group is we're a live pub reading group. We read it week by week in the pub through the calendar year. And now we've got up to Calypso. We've just met Leopold and Molly Bloom. So very exciting. We're out of the dense, dark wood of the Telemachiad and Stephen Dedalus wall to wall, and now it's much more fun, dare I say, with Leopold Bloom. So this one is in that, and it's all about animals. Leopold Bloom among the animals is what I've called it. And although I wouldn't put you off watching it if you're reading the book in real time and you've got up to Calypso, I ought to point out that some of the things that I'm going to say reaches further ahead in the book, deeper into the book. I don't really give anything away, and I don't think it's that important. So I wouldn't discourage you from watching this if you're concerned about learning anything from further on in the book. But if that is an issue to you, then save it for later. But honestly, I just really don't think that matters. So let's get on with it. It's in three parts and a conclusion. Part one I've called "It Begins with a Cat," and and the whole thing is an introduction to Leopold Bloom through a lens that I think is intimate, revealing, powerful. His relationship with animals. And that seems like a small detail, a domestic quirk, maybe a bit of colour on Joyce's vast canvas. But I feel that animals form one of the most coherent, symbolic aspects of the book, and offer a real insight into Bloom's character. They reveal his ethics, his imagination, emotional life, and his place in the novel's moral architecture. And they also allow us to see how Joyce reworks the Homeric template, not by rejecting Odysseus outright, but by reshaping the heroic detail for the modern world. Bloom shares much with Odysseus: curiosity, resourcefulness, erotic complexity, a long day's journey home. But he ultimately differs in his domesticity, where Odysseus, especially as Dante portrays him, is damned by his wanderlust. And if you know me by now, you'll know I can't resist bringing in a link to Dante, Joyce's favourite author. So that Ulysses is damned by his wanderlust, whereas Bloom is saved by his rootedness and his domesticity. And nowhere is this clearer than in his interactions with animals, and it all begins with a cat. So Bloom's first appearance in Ulysses is not grand or dramatic. He's in the kitchen, preparing breakfast and interacting with the cat. Joyce renders this cat with astonishing precision, the weight of its paws, the tonal shifts in its meows, the way it tests Bloom's attention. Far from a symbolic prop, It seems to be a creature with its own agency, demands and presence, and Bloom meets it with tenderness. He tries to understand it, what it wants, how it feels. He imagines its hunger, its preferences, and its inner life. This is Bloom's ethical mode: attention, curiosity, imaginative sympathy. He doesn't want to dominate the cat. He collaborates with it. He negotiates with it and gives it respect. And this is the first thing Joyce wants us to know about Bloom. He's a man who cares. And we hope that as he makes breakfast for his wife, and in bed no less, that this equally applies to his human relationships. But this is challenged immediately. The cat's simple, honest demands stand against the unspoken and also spoken tension that exists between Bloom and Molly. Molly seems aggressive, warning him to scold the teapot, not to burn the toast, burning and scalding. It has a harsh feel. The cat becomes a barometer of Bloom's emotional life. He associates freely with it in a way he doesn't with his wife. A barometer specifically of his marriage, noting how the cat toys with mice almost for the fun of it. Domesticity becomes the stage on which Bloom's character is revealed. The cat is the first creature Bloom encounters that morning and the last at night, and is the first creature he cares for. A small domestic act, but which sets the tone for the entire day. Bloom's heroism is rooted in the home, in the kitchen, in the everyday. Now, Joyce doesn't stop with observing the cat. He makes Bloom himself cat-like. His tread is soft. His presence is quiet. Well, quiet-ish. His movements through Dublin are stealthy, observant, sensual. He is a creature of touch, smell, taste, of the body, rather than of the intellect. Bloom shares much with Odysseus. Resourcefulness, curiosity, wandering day, a return home. But to repeat, where Odysseus is ultimately driven by wanderlust, so much so that Dante damns him to hell for it, Bloom is anchored in domesticity. Yes, he dreams big. Circe shows us that. But he knows reality when he sees it. He chooses the kitchen over the open sea, a rowing boat over a trireme galley. He chooses Eccles Street over endless roaming. His heroism lies not in escape, but in care and return. Bloom moves through the world with a kind of gentle attentiveness and sensitivity to the needs of others, human and non-human alike. He notices things others overlook: the aloofness of birds and the cat, the suffering of horses, the hunger of dogs, the imperiousness of a rat. His empathy is not abstract, it is embodied. It is rooted in the senses. He feels his way through the world. And this is where Joyce begins to build a symbolic network around Bloom. The cat in Calypso is not just a domestic animal, it is the first node in a chain of associations that will expand across the novel. Cats, dogs, horses, birds, rats. They all become mirrors in which Bloom's character is reflected. They reveal his gentleness, his curiosity, his compassion, his loneliness, his imagination and moral vision. They also reveal the world around him, a Dublin that is often indifferent hostile, or blind to the non-human world. Bloom's relationship with animals is not sentimental. It is practical, observational, grounded. He neither romanticizes or projects fantasies onto them. He simply pays attention. And in a novel obsessed with consciousness, with the inner lives of characters, this attention to the non-human is radical. Joyce expands the field of interiority beyond the human. The cat has a mind, and so does the dog, the horse and rat. And Bloom recognises this. He imagines their thoughts, their feelings, their needs, not perfectly, not completely, but with humility and curiosity. And this is what the scholar David Rando, in his essay, The Cat's Meow, Ulysses, Animals and the Veterinary Gaze, which is in the James Joyce Quarterly 2009, spring-summer, I think, he calls this the veterinary gaze, a way of looking at animals that is attentive, diagnostic and compassionate without being sentimental. Bloom's way of seeing animals is a critique of objectifying medical gaze of modernity. He does not dissect, he observes. He doesn't dominate, he collaborates, he doesn't claim to know the animal mind, but he imagines it with humility. Humility. Bloom's empathy is grounded in the recognition that other minds exist, but cannot be fully known. He imagines animal consciousness without claiming to master it. He respects the opacity of the non-human world. He respects the limits of his own understanding, and this is a profoundly ethical stance, especially in an age of mechanization, industrialization, and war. Bloom's attentive to animals is a quiet act of resistance. As Joyce wrote this episode and several of the earlier episodes in the book, the First World War erupted all around him. A conflict that saw the mechanized slaughter of millions of animals, horses, mules, dogs, fed into artillery fire, gas and mud. The war industrialized cruelty on a scale unimagined. And it's against this backdrop that Bloom's tenderness towards animals becomes a moral counterpoint. The man who feeds the gulls while Europe feeds horses to machine guns. While the world tears itself apart thinking only of victory, Bloom sees the other point of view, even the non-human one. The foundation of Bloom's heroism is not, like Odysseus, the heroism of the battlefield or the sea. It's the heroism of the kitchen, the street, the neighbour's house and the bedroom. It's the heroism of care. And it begins with a cat. Okay, that's part one. Now, part two, I've called The Panther, the Outsider and the Mythic Animal. As Bloom moves out of the kitchen and into the wider symbolic field of the novel, Joyce surrounds him with animals of a different order. The domestic cat of Calypso is the first creature Bloom encounters, but not so for the reader. Before Bloom appears at all, Joyce gives us a very different animal, the Black Panther of Heine's Nightmare in Telemachus. This is one of the most enigmatic and unsettling images in the novel, and it is no accident that it precedes Bloom's entrance. Joyce is preparing the symbolic terrain. The panther, while cat-like, displays other characteristics: large, dangerous, exotic, frightening. A creature of darkness and power, it terrifies Haynes, the Anglo-Irish colonial intellectual who loves and has come to study sentimental Irish folklore, but cannot control his own subconscious. The nightmare is a projection of colonial fear, the fear of the other, of the dark, the fear of what cannot be controlled or understood. In short, natives in the Orientalist sense. So I take the liberty here of excluding white Irish folk, which I get is contentious. It is a fear rooted in empire, in racial anxiety, in the need to dominate and classify. And it erupts in the form of an animal. The first animal in Ulysses is a creature of terror, but also a creature of misrecognition. Haynes does not understand the panther. He fears it. He cannot interpret it. He is overwhelmed by it. And what he doesn't understand, he seeks to kill. And this is the point. Joyce is staging the psychology of prejudice before Bloom even arrives. The panther is a symbol of the racialized outsider, the figure who is feared because he is not understood. And when Bloom appears in Calypso, he embodies precisely the qualities that trigger such anxieties. He is swarthy, Jewish-ish, cosmopolitan, ambiguous. He is the other in a city that prides itself on sameness, albeit binary, the English and the Irish. The panther, then, is Bloom's shadow. It is the animal version of the racialized fear that surrounds him. And Joyce places it at the very beginning of the novel to frame Bloom's entrance. The reader meets the panther before meeting Bloom. The fear precedes the man. But Joyce does not leave the panther as a symbol of fear. He complicates it, he transforms it, even redeems it. In medieval bestiaries, the panther is not a creature of darkness. It is a Christ figure. After eating, it sleeps for 3 days, then awakens with a sweet-smelling breath that draws all the animals to it except the dragon. The dark animal is the bringer of sweetness and renewal. It is the opposite of what Haynes fears. It is the opposite of what prejudice imagines. It is a symbol of compassion, attraction, and peace. Above all, it is the inversion of John 1 verse 5. It is the darkness shining in the brightness that the brightness cannot understand. Inversion, perhaps, blasphemous maybe, but surely encapsulating the sentiments of Christ. Now Joyce knew this tradition. He read medieval literature and loved the symbolic richness of bestiaries. And he uses the Christ panther to invert the racialized fear of the outsider. Bloom, the dark figure in the Dublin imagination, becomes the moral centre of the novel. He is the one who draws others to him, not through power or charisma, though he fantasizes of that, but through gentleness, curiosity, and care. He is the one who brings sweetness into the world. He is the one who redeems the city through his attention to the small, the fragile, the overlooked. The cat in Calypso is the domesticated, miniaturized version of this symbolic animal. It is the baby panther in the kitchen, the gentle creature that Bloom cares for and that cares for him in return, hinting at the onset of rain so Bloom can be Elijah. It is the animal that reveals his compassion. It not only bookends Bloom's day, but it is the animal that, by its link to the panther, links Bloom to a much larger symbolic tradition. But there is further an equally deep layer to the panther symbol, of which Joyce was fully aware because he has Lipperty Virag voice it in Circe. In early Christian polemic, the philosopher Celsus claimed that Jesus, far from being the Son of God, was actually the illegitimate son of a Roman soldier named Panthera. And worse, that Panthera was not the only man with which the Virgin Mary was familiar, and that her casual attitude towards extramarital sex was generally known about town, thus undermining the virgin birth, challenging the purity of Christ's lineage, and introducing doubt and impurity into the entire Christian story, all way too tempting for Joyce to ignore. He loved anything that destabilized orthodoxy, anything that introduced ambiguity and that complicated the official narrative, especially when it came to Catholicism, albeit he would have been tortured with the guilt. All as blasphemous as it's possible to get. And this Panthera tradition fits perfectly into the symbolic field around Bloom. Bloom is a man whose paternity is wounded. Like Joseph, like Panthera, he is a father denied a son. He is a man whose lineage is uncertain, whose identity is mixed, whose belonging is always in question. He is the outsider father, the hybrid figure, the man who stands at the edge of genealogies. The Panthera tradition becomes another echo in the symbolic chain. Bloom as the man of uncertain origins, the man whose identity is contested, the man who carries the burden of impurity in a society increasingly concerned with pure blood, as we'll see down Barney Kiernan's pub in the Cyclops episode. But more, much more than this, as Frank Sinatra said, Bloom will be the father figure to Stephen, the Virgil to Stephen as Dante. And Stephen, we will come to realise that if he plays his cards right, he can in due course be the saviour of not just Irish art, but of modernist art. And like Jesus, Stephen's paternal parentage is questionable. His birth father is not up to the job. That's his Joseph or Panthera. He will come to need this Bloom, bleak, panther-like figure. Joyce weaves all this into the novel without ever stating it explicitly. He lets beyond that Lipperty Virag oblique reference, he lets the symbols do the work. The panther in Telemachus is not explained. It is simply there, a dark presence in the background. The cat in Calypso is not interpreted. It is simply there, a domestic presence in the kitchen. On this day, Bloom will have scant opportunity to guide Stephen, and on this day, Stephen will not have heeded it anyway. But the reader is invited to make the connections, to see the symbolic chain, and to understand the moral architecture of the novel. Bloom's relationship with animals is not just empathy, it is identity. He is linked to animals through fear, myth, through tradition, prejudice and compassion. He is the panther feared by Haynes. He is the Christ panther of the bestiary. He is the Roman Panthera in the heterodox tradition. He is the cat-like man in the kitchen with the step of a pard. And this is why animals are so important in Ulysses. When Bloom feeds gulls, imagines the life of a rat, and bemoans the suffering of a horse, he identifies with them. He imagines their lives, sees himself in them, seeing his own vulnerability, fragility, and his own outsider status reflected in the non-human world. Thus, they are not decorative or incidental, but central to the novel's moral vision. They reveal the world's cruelty and Bloom's compassion, the city's prejudice and Bloom's openness, the mythic past and domestic present. This is the symbolic field in which Bloom moves. And it's this wider group of animals, gulls, rats, horses, dogs, that I'll consider in the final substantive part of this lecture, part 3. Here we go. So, as Bloom moves through Dublin, the symbolic field of animals expands dramatically. The cat in Calypso and the panther in Telemachus establishes the poles of domesticity and of myth. But in the middle of the novel is populated by a whole bestiary of creatures, gulls, rats, dogs, horses, each of which reveals something essential about Bloom's character. Joyce uses these animals not as decoration but as diagnostic instruments. They measure Bloom's empathy, his imagination, loneliness, and moral vision. They also measure the world around him, a city often indifferent, hostile, or simply blind to the non-human world. And an example of Bloom's empathy occurs in Lestragonians when he feeds the gulls. A small moment, but a clear expression of Bloom's ethical sensibility. He sees the gulls circling about the river, hungry, opportunistic, alive. He imagines their hunger, their flight, their lives. He understands them as creatures navigating the same urban environment as he is navigating, and he feeds them. A simple act, but one of recognition. He doesn't see pests, rather fellow inhabitants. He sees their needs, their hunger, their vitality as part of the moral community. And this moment in the episode, remember, that begins with the exclamation that Elijah is coming, also connects Bloom to Elijah, who in the biblical narrative is fed by birds, ravens who bring him sustenance in the wilderness. Bloom reverses this relationship. Elijah is sustained by the natural world. Bloom sustains it. Elijah receives care from animals in the wild. Bloom gives care to animals in the city. This inversion is subtle but important, showing how Joyce plays with biblical motives but makes them fit the modern world. At some point, we'll consider theosophy, Giordano Bruno, and hermeticity, which can be summed up as above, so below. The huge mythical events in the planets or whatever, and the minute domestic events. Bloom is not a prophet in the wilderness, he is a man in a city, but like Elijah, he thought it would rain, and he will prophesize the winner of a horse race. In the subtle ways discussed, like Elijah, he will pave the way for the Saviour. Bloom's prophecies are small, unintended, everyday and domestic, but they are there. They are prophecies. Nonetheless, he is a prophet. As above, so below. In Hades, Bloom notices the rat at the cemetery, a creature associated with filth, disease and death. Many would recoil. Not Bloom. He imagines its life, its hunger, its place in the ecosystem of the cemetery. Where others recoil, he sees a fellow creature trying to make its way in the world. He also observes its role in the continuity between life and death, between human and non-human, between the sacred and the profane. He sees the rat as part of the same cycle that will eventually claim him and all life. This moment reveals something about Bloom's relationship to death. Unlike Stephen, he does not fear it in the abstract. He understands it as part of the natural order. He does not recoil from the physicality of death. He accepts it, and this sanguine attitude will, we hope, help him to find closure with Rudy. Seeing himself and all humans as an integral part of the broader non-human world is profoundly modern, secular, and compassionate. In Eumaeus, Bloom encounters an old horse pulling the cab. Actually, less of the pulling and more standing still and pooing. I see an echo of Odysseus's faithful dog Argos, who recognises his returning master and dies, and also of Athos, Rudolph Bloom's loyal dog, of whom we'll hear more. Joyce fuses these echoes to create a moment of pathos as Bloom pays his respects to the horse, recognising its long years of uncomplaining service, too long. He sees the animal's life as meaningful, not disposable, as having dignity even while pooing. This is Bloom's Argos moment, but inverted, again inverted. Argos recognises its master, Bloom gives recognition to the horse, and a kind of surrogate for Athos, both creatures who carries the weight of memory, suffering and endurance. Bloom's empathy for the horse is also empathy for his father, for himself, for the past he cannot reclaim. Dogs. Dogs appear throughout the novel as a way of contrasting Bloom with Stephen. In Proteus, Stephen encounters two dogs, one living, one dead, and both unsettle him. The living dog is chaotic vitality, a reminder of the body Stephen distrusts. The dead dog is a memento mori, a confrontation with decay and mortality. Stephen intellectualizes both. He cannot simply see the animals, he must interpret them, aestheticize them, distance himself from them. He's afraid of the animal world because it reminds him of his own physicality, vulnerability and mortality. Stephen's fear is metaphysical. Bloom's response is practical, embodied, compassionate. The contrast is foundational to the novel. Bloom's domesticity and empathy are grounded in the body. Stephen's alienation forged and stuck in the mind. Bloom sees animals as part of the world. Stephen sees them as symbols. Where Bloom sees life, Stephen sees meaning. Bloom sees creatures, Stephen sees concepts. This is why Bloom is the moral centre of the novel. He's grounded, embodied, attentive, compassionate, and above all, present. Gary Owen in Cyclops is another kind of dog entirely. A parodic, anthropomorphized extension of the citizen's racism. As parody, he is chameleon. With the citizen, he is a nationalist caricature, territorial, aggressive, suspicious of outsiders. But with Bob Doran, who may have cured him by kindness, he is dog as man about town. But it's all parody, so we do not trust either. And Bloom does not interact with Gary Owen directly in any meaningful way. The dog's aggression is an extension of the citizen's hostility, and when Gary Owen chases Bloom at the end, it's almost certainly the cab he is chasing, not Bloom himself. Bloom is not attacked by the dog, rather, if at all, by the ideology the dog represents. In Circe, Bloom is followed by a pack of dogs, or is it one many-faceted dog? They are after the meat he carries, though Bloom does not really pick up on that. Animals recognise Bloom as a caretaker. They follow him because he attends to them. Even in fantasy, Bloom's power is not domination but attraction, even if he doesn't know why. Now this brings me to the final section of the lecture. Bloom's domestic heroism, his relationship to Odysseus, and reminding us of the way animals reveal the true nature of his character. So I'll try and draw our various thoughts together. So we follow Bloom through a city alive with animals, cats, dogs, horses, birds, rats. We've seen how each creature reveals something essential about him: his empathy, his imagination, loneliness, moral clarity. We've seen how Joyce uses animals not as decoration, but as diagnostic instruments, as mirrors in which Bloom's character is reflected. We've seen how Bloom's relationship with animals connects him to biblical tradition, to medieval bestiaries, to heterodox Christian polemic, to Homeric epic, and to the modern world of mechanized war. So drawing things together to conclude, let's remind ourselves of Bloom's domestic heroism. Domestic. He's not a hero in the traditional sense. He doesn't fight battles, slay monsters, reclaim kingdoms, command armies, embark on voyages across the sea. But he heroically pays attention. He cares. He sees the world around him with clarity and compassion. He recognizes the needs of others, human and non-human alike, and he responds to them, not because he thinks it's the right thing to do, but because it's part of his DNA. The essence of Bloom's heroism is the heroism of the kitchen, the grocery store, the corner of the street. The name of the book compels us to compare Bloom with Odysseus, and they share, as I said at the beginning, much: curiosity, resourcefulness, erotic complexity, a long day's journey home. But ultimately, Bloom ultimately differs in his domesticity. Odysseus, as I've said, especially as portrayed by Dante, is damned by his wanderlust, and even Homer, much more generous to Ulysses, plants that seed. He cannot stay home. He cannot rest. Like Icarus, he cannot be confined by domesticity. He must always go further, see more, discover more. His desire for knowledge becomes a form of pride and hubris. He has FOMO. Bloom, yes, he wanders, but unlike Odysseus, he ultimately chooses home. The kitchen, the cat. He chooses Eccles Street and Molly. He chooses care over conquest, attention over ambition, presence over absence. Of course, he dreams big, as Circe shows us, but he knows reality when he sees it. He shakes off the wanderlust that damns Odysseus and comes home. We hope and think for good. Joyce modernizes the heroic ideal. He uses animals to do so. Thus, Bloom cares for the world rather than conquers it. He feeds birds, not slay dragons. Rather than command armies, this man worries of animals dying in war. The moral bestiary of Ulysses is not just a collection of animals, it's a map of Bloom's soul. The cat in Calypso reveals his tenderness, the gulls in Laestrygonians his generosity, the rat in Hades reveals his acceptance of mortality. The horse in Eumaeus reveals his empathy for suffering and loyalty. The dogs in Circe reveal his imaginative power, not to mention him becoming a sow. Garryoin in Cyclops reveals the hostility he faces. The panther in Telemachus reveals the fear that precedes him. Elijah's birds reveal the prophetic tradition he inherits and transforms. The bat in Nausicaa, well, let's leave something for another time. Each animal is a facet of Bloom's character. Each animal is a mirror, each a revelation. Now you may say, I glorify Bloom. What of his many fallibilities? He certainly behaves like a complete pig on occasion, and not just in his imagination. Well, yes, he is, after all, a man of many turns. Finally, let's come back to the cat. It bookends Bloom's day, and so this lecture. In Calypso, it introduces us to Bloom via his empathy. In Ithaca, its return marks Bloom's return, and he and the cat can both go to bed. But the reader cannot, for in bed, Bloom still has plenty of figuring out to do. But he's a domesticated cat, and he knows in his heart that in bed, next to Molly, is where he must do the figuring. He heard her call out from her bed at 8 that morning. "Come, come, pussy, come." For a hero he may be, but like the cat, he's a domesticated one. Thank you.